The train screamed to a stop, and every man on the platform turned to look at the woman stepping down from it. She wore gray, plain as a Sunday sermon, and carried one small trunk like it held her whole life. Jade Cole stood frozen, hat in his hands, heart hammering like a spooked horse. Then she dropped her trunk. Right there on the wooden platform, in front of the whole town of Willow Creek, the trunk hit the boards with a bang, and her gloves flew off, and a small gray mouse shot out from under her skirts and ran straight across old Mr. Tucker's boots. Mr. Tucker jumped back with a yell. Two women near the ticket window screamed and grabbed their skirts. A young boy laughed so hard he fell off the fence he'd been sitting on. Somebody's dog took off barking after the mouse, and the whole platform turned into a mess of noise and dust. Eleanor Vance did not scream. She did not blush and hide her face like a proper lady was supposed to. She got down on her knees, right there in the dirt in her good travel dress, and laughed. Not a small, polite laugh, a real one, loud and free, the kind that made her shoulders shake. "Poor thing," she said, still laughing, brushing dust off her skirt. "He rode all the way from St. Louis in my trunk and never once complained. Braver than most men I know." The crowd went quiet, staring at her like she'd grown a second head. A woman laughing on her knees in the dirt over a mouse in front of the whole town. Mrs. Higgins pressed a hand to her mouth. Old Tucker just shook his head slow, like he couldn't decide what he'd just seen. Jade stood there with his hat still in his hands, and something in his chest turned over, warm and strange. Most women would have fainted. Most women would have cried or scolded or demanded somebody fetch a broom. This one just knelt in the street dirt, gray dress and all, laughing like it was the best thing that had happened to her all week. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, looking up at him, still smiling, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "Jade," he said, "just Jade." He held out his hand to help her up. She took it, and her grip was firm, not shy at all, though her eyes, a strange, pale color, gray touched with violet, held something careful behind the laughter, something she wasn't showing yet. "Well, Jade," she said, standing and smoothing her skirt like nothing unusual had happened at all, "I hope the rest of Wyoming is this lively." Behind them the crowd was still murmuring, still watching. Some smiled, some frowned, already deciding what kind of woman this was. Jade just picked up her trunk, mouse and all, and said, "Wagons this way, ma'am." Winter came slow and hard to the ranch, and with it came a habit Jade could not stop noticing. Eleanor never took off her gloves. She wore them cooking eggs over the hot stove. She wore them scrubbing shirts in cold well water. She wore them at night, tucked into bed, sleeves buttoned tight at the wrist even when the fire burned warm in the next room. Once, reaching for her hand as they crossed the yard, Jade felt her flinch away so quick the milk pail nearly spilled. "Sorry," she said fast, cheeks going red. "I ain't used to. I'm sorry, Jade." "No harm," he said, but it stung more than he let on. The town noticed too. Small towns always do. At the Sunday social, the ranch wives gathered by the punch table, whispering behind their fans while Eleanor sat alone near the window, gloved hands folded neat in her lap. "Never once removed her bonnet all the way," one woman murmured. "Proud if you ask me," said another. "Too good for quilting circle." "I heard she's running from a husband back east," a third whispered, leaning in close. "Or worse, some kind of sickness." Jade heard it from the porch, and his jaw went tight as a fence wire, but he said nothing. He did not believe the ugly talk. Still, he could not deny his wife held something locked away, quiet as a shut drawer nobody was allowed to open. But love does not wait for full understanding. It grew the night Jade came home soaked through from a storm, shaking with fever, and Eleanor stayed up till dawn changing the cold cloths on his head, never once complaining of the lost sleep. It grew the morning he wept at his father's grave, and instead of speaking, she simply knelt beside him in the frosted grass and rested her gloved hand on his arm until his shoulders went still. By the time the first snow fell, Jade knew, plain and certain, that he loved her, secret and all. One quiet evening by the fire, he decided to ask. "Alina," he said gently, "I don't need to know your past if you ain't ready, but whatever it is, it won't change how I feel." Her eyes filled sudden with tears. For a long moment she only stared into the flames. "You say that now," she whispered, "but you ain't seen." "Then show me," Jade said softly. "Whenever you're ready, I ain't going nowhere." She studied his face a long while, searching it the way a person searches a locked door. "Not tonight," she said finally, "but soon, Jade, I promise you, soon." Outside, snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering the whole prairie white, while inside the fire burned low, and neither one of them said another word. The blizzard hit fast, howling like something wounded, and Jade was out checking the cattle when a spooked horse threw him hard against the fence post. He staggered back to the house half frozen, blood soaking through his sleeve, and fell through the door onto the floor. "Jade!" Alina screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. There was no time for gloves now. She tore off her mittens and pressed cloth hard against the wound, her bare hands working fast in the firelight. And there, for the first time, Jade saw them. Her fingers were long, longer than a normal hand's, with skin stretched faint and thin between them like a duck's foot. On her wrists, small silver-white marks caught the firelight, shimmering soft, like fish scales in a running creek. Jade, dizzy from the cold and the blood loss, could only stare. Alina went stiff as stone. Her whole body froze with fear. "Now you see," she whispered, voice breaking apart. "Now you know why I hid them." She waited for him to pull back, to call her a monster, an unnatural thing, the way a man in St. Louis once had, right before he called off their wedding and let ugly whispers follow her through the city like smoke. But Jade, weak and bleeding on his own kitchen floor, only reached for her strange hand and held it firm. "Finish patching me up," he said quietly. "Then you'll tell me everything, all right." Alina's eyes spilled over, but she nodded, and finished binding the wound with hands she no longer tried to hide. Later, wrapped in blankets by the fire, she told him all of it. Her mother's family came from a cold fishing village across the sea, where old stories spoke of women born touched by the water itself, not mermaids exactly, but something close, something rare. Carried in the blood maybe once in a generation. Her mother had hidden her hands her whole life. Alina had done the same since she was 6 years old, since the day other children first saw and screamed and called her a devil's child. "I came out west because nobody here knew me," Alina said, staring into the flames. "I thought if I hid it well enough I could have an ordinary life. I'm sorry, Jade. I should have trusted you sooner." Jade was quiet a long moment. Then he lifted her strange, lovely hand and pressed his lips to it, gentle as a prayer. "Alina," he said, "I've loved a good woman these past months. Kind, hardworking, patient with my grief. That woman's still sitting right here, hands and all." "You ain't frightened," she whispered. "I've wrestled angry bulls twice my size," Jade said, the ghost of a smile in his voice. "Reckon I can handle loving a woman with pretty hands." Alina let out a sound half sob, half laugh, and buried her face against his shoulder while the storm raged on outside, and the fire burned steady between them. Winter melted slow into spring, and something in Alina melted with it. She stopped wearing gloves in the house, then in the barn, then in the garden, sun warm on her bare hands. Jade noticed the change before she did, her shoulders sitting looser, her laugh coming easier, her hymns hummed loud instead of quiet under her breath. But the town still worried her. "They'll never accept it," she told Jade one morning, watching the road that led into Willow Creek. "People fear what's different, you know that." "Some do," Jade agreed. "But you'd be surprised how folks come around, once they see a thing plain instead of just whispering about it in the dark." The test came sooner than either one expected. In April, fire broke out at the schoolhouse during the spring picnic, sparked by a tipped-over cook stove. Black smoke poured into the sky. Children screamed. The schoolteacher was trapped near the collapsed back wall, flames licking closer by the second. Elena tore off her gloves and ran. She dove straight into the flooded runoff ditch by the old well, swimming through the narrow, water-filled tunnel faster than any person should have been able to swim, her strange webbed hands cutting through the current like she was born to it. She pulled the terrified teacher free through the flooded passage, back into open air, not 30 seconds before the whole back wall caved into the fire. The entire town watched her do it, watched her strange, beautiful hands, watched the silver-white marks catch the afternoon light. For one long moment, the crowd went dead silent. Then Mrs. Higgins, of all people, stepped forward first and wrapped a shawl around Elena's shaking shoulders. "Whatever you are, child," the older woman said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you just saved Miss Abigail's life. That's all Willow Creek needs to know." Slowly, heads began to nod. A few gruff old ranch hands, not given to soft words, tipped their hats to her in respect. Not everyone came around easy. A gossip or two still whispered unnatural behind cupped hands, and Elena still caught the odd, wary glance. But most of the fear that had followed her curdled, slow, into something closer to wonder. The children thought her webbed fingers were the most marvelous thing they'd ever seen, and by summer's county fair, Elena found herself laughing, showing off her hands proudly, like a magician revealing her best trick. That night, stars hung thick over the ranch house, and Jade and Elena sat together on the porch steps, her bare hand resting easy in his. "I never thought I'd stop being afraid," Elena said softly. "You ain't afraid now?" Jade asked. She looked down at their joined hands and smiled the fullest smile he'd ever seen on her. "Not anymore," she said. "Not since the day you saw me playing and loved me anyway." Jade pulled her close, and the wind kept talking soft across the prairie. But for the first time in a long while, it no longer sounded lonely.